Welcome to Forbidden Desires channel that we hope you will have fun with us. Enjoy watching. 5 years ago when I signed the papers to adopt Edward, I knew I was doing the right thing. His parents, Sophia and John, were our closest friends, family and everything but blood. Their sudden death had left a gaping hole in Edward, just a boy at the time, needed stability, love, a home. I was more than willing to give him that. At first it was about helping him grieve, about ensuring that he never felt alone. He was quiet, withdrawn, lost in his pain, but with time he started coming back to life. He found solace in sports, in pushing his body to its limits, and that was where our dynamic began to shift. Subtly, slowly, until I could no longer ignore it. I work as a fitness instructor. I've always been passionate about health, about discipline, about using physical strength to build mental resilience. When Edward started coming to the gym, I was proud of him. I thought it was his way of healing. But looking back, I wonder if I was too blind, too naive to see the signs for what they were. At first he would ask me for help with exercises, harmless questions about form, about diet, about technique. But then his questions became excuses. He wanted me to correct his stance, to demonstrate movements that required my hands on him, my touch guiding his body. I told myself it was normal, it was my job after all. But then came the compliments. "You have the best form, Diana. I bet the guys here wish they had a trainer like you." I laughed it off. "That's enough flattery, Ash, focus on your raps." But he didn't stop. "You don't even look like you're pushing 41, no offense. But you put all the younger trainers to shame." That one made my breath hitch in my throat. I forced a chuckle, tried to make it seem light. "Careful, Edward, that sounds dangerously close to flirting." "I mean, if it's true, is it really flirting?" He shot back, a smirk tugging at his lips. I ignored it. I had to. But then there was the way he started looking at me, not as a mother, not even as a friend, but as something else entirely. I would catch his gaze lingering, his jaw tightening, his eyes dark with something unspoken. One day, after a particularly intense workout, he asked me to help him stretch again. Nothing unusual until I felt the deliberate way he leaned into my touch, the way his body tensed beneath my hands. "You feel that?" I asked, pressing into the muscle at his shoulder. "Yeah," he murmured, his voice lower than usual. "Feels good." I pulled my hands back like I'd been burned. I didn't address it. I should have, but instead I created distance. I told him I was too busy to train him, that I had new clients to focus on. It worked briefly. Then he started showing up every day if I wasn't available. He trained alone, pushing himself harder, lifting heavier, dripping sweat as he caught my gaze in the mirror, wordless, challenging me to say something I didn't. One night I stayed late after work, running through my usual routine, trying to clear my mind. The gym was mostly empty, save for a few dedicated lifters in the back. When I heard footsteps behind me, I knew who it was before I even turned around. "You're here late," he said, wiping sweat from his forehead. I forced a smile. "So are you?" He walked closer, his breath still heavy from his workout. "You've been avoiding me." I swallowed hard. "That's ridiculous, is it?" I tried to step back, but he was faster, not in a threatening way, just there in my space, close enough that I could see the beads of sweat along his collarbones, smell the faint trace of his cologne, mixing with exertion. "Diana," his voice was quieter. Now steadier. "I know you feel it too." I exhaled sharply. "Edward." "Stop." He studied me for a long moment before finally stepping back. But there was something in his expression, something knowing, something patient, like he wasn't giving up, like he was just waiting. And the terrifying part, I wasn't sure if I wanted him to. "Edward, you need to be careful." I kept my voice low, barely above a whisper, though the gym was nearly empty. The last thing I needed was for someone to overhear something that could be twisted into something. It wasn't, or maybe it already was something. I felt his eyes on me before I turned to face him. He stood there, relaxed, confident, the corner of his mouth lifting into that easy, knowing smile. "That's between us, Diana," he murmured, "and that's what John, as long as we're both happy with it." His words sent a ripple of something warm down my spine. I swallowed, trying to keep my expression neutral, trying to keep this light because that's what it was, just light-hearted, teasing, casual, meaningless. But that was a lie, wasn't it? I liked it, the game, the tension, the way he looked at me like I was someone worth looking at. It had been a long time since I felt that way, but I was married. A good man, a stable, dependable, predictable man, a man who loved me, who had been by my side for years. And Edward Tunn was. I exhaled sharply and forced a smile. This is ridiculous. He leaned in slightly, his voice lower. Now, if it was really ridiculous, you wouldn't be standing here talking to me about it. I opened my mouth to protest, to say something that would set the boundary back in place. But then his fingers brushed my wrist just for a second, just enough for me to feel the warmth of his skin against mine. I pulled my hand back a fraction too late. Edward noticed, his smile widened just a little, just enough, and I knew then I was playing with fire. It started small, the lingering glances when we thought no one was looking, the way his hand would touch my lower back as he passed by, fleeting but deliberate. At first I told myself it was harmless when he complimented me on my workouts, on the way I moved on, how strong I was. Harmless when I laughed at his jokes, at the way he teased me, at the way he found excuses to keep me near. Harmless when I let myself enjoy it, as that's all. It was flirting, not an affair, not something I would ever act on, just something that made me feel alive. It had been years since I felt that spark, since I felt someone watching me like that, since I felt like more than just a wife, just a woman in a routine, just someone moving through life with quiet, steady predictability. And Edward saw it. He saw how I responded, how my breath hitched, how my pulse quickened, how I lingered. He saw the way I didn't pull away, and that only made him bolder. It was late. Most of the trainers had gone home, and the few remaining GYM members were too caught up in their own workouts to notice anything. Edward and I were by the weights, the air thick with that quiet, unspoken thing between us. I was showing him a move, guiding him, correcting his posture, my hands adjusting his arms, his shoulders, and then I felt it, the way his muscles tensed under my touch, the way his breathing changed, the way he turned his head just slightly toward me. I hesitated, my fingers still on his arm. It's a second too long, a moment too much, see? I said quickly, clearing my throat, stepping back. You just need to focus on form. Edward exhaled, his smirk returning, right? For my turn to walk away, but his voice stopped me. You like this? I froze. His tone was casual, light, but there was an etc. to it, something, knowing something that made my stomach tighten. I turned back to him, forcing a laugh. Like what? The way we are, he said simply, the way you look at me, the way you don't stop me. A rush of heat crawled up my neck. Edward, you don't have to say anything. He interrupted, stepping closer, lowering his voice. I already know. For a moment. I said nothing because he was right. I didn't stop him. I let this continue. I let it grow, and now it was something bigger than just teasing, something neither of us could quite walk away from. I took a slow breath and met his gaze. Steady and unwavering. You need to be careful. I murmured. Edward studied me for a long moment before smiling again, this time softer, less teasing, more assured. I will, he said. But I didn't believe him, and worse, I didn't want him to. At home, Tom was waiting. He greeted me with a kiss, with warmth, with familiarity, and I felt guilt coil in my stomach. I hadn't done anything, not really, not yet, but I had let something happen in my mind, something I couldn't quite undo. At dinner, Tom was talking, his voice steady, reliable. I nodded in the right places, smiled when I should, responded when necessary. But my mind was elsewhere, back at the gym, back to the way Edward looked at me, back to the way I had let him, and for the first time I realized this wasn't just a harmless game anymore. This was a choice. When I wasn't sure I was strong enough to make. I should have stopped it before it started. Before the stolen glances turned into lingering touches, before the teasing turned into something sharper, something with weight. Before I let myself imagine the way his lips might feel against mine. But some things are inevitable, like gravity, like fire-maying air, like Edward and me. There had been a long day. The gym was nearly empty, the faint hum of machines filling the quiet. I was finishing up when I heard him behind me. You always stay late, he said, his voice familiar, warm, dangerous. I exhaled, my hands gripping the towel slung around my neck. So do you. He stepped closer. Maybe I just liked the company. I turned to face him, and that was my first mistake, because he was looking at me the way no one had in a long time, like he wanted me, like he had been waiting for me to finally see it. I should have walked away. Instead, I whispered Edward. His name felt different on my tongue. Heavy, forbidden. He reached up, brushing a strand of hair from my face. His fingertips barely grazed my skin, but I felt it like a brand. My breath caught. We shouldn't. I murmured. He nodded, but he didn't move away. I know neither of us moved. The tension stretched between us, electric, unbearable, and then I felt it, his hand at my waist, his grip firm, steady. I should have stepped back. I should have ended it. But instead I leaned in. And then his lips were on mine. Soft at first, tentative. But then something cracked open inside both of us. He pulled me closer and I melted into him, my hands gripping his shirt. My body pressed against his like we had been waiting for this moment for years. He tasted like heat, like need, like something I had been starving for. We weren't just kissing, we were falling, and neither of us wanted to stop. After that night, everything changed. We didn't talk about it, we didn't need to. We both knew what it meant. At the gym we still flirted, still played our game of careful touches and secret glances. But now there was something unspoken between us, something burning, waiting for the right moment to consume us completely. We kissed again and again and again. Each time we told ourselves it was just a moment, that we weren't crossing the line, not really, but we both knew the truth. We were already on the other side. At home I changed. I started talking less, laughing less. I kept my distance from Edward when Tom was around, avoiding eye contact, avoiding temptation. I knew Tom would notice if I wasn't careful. He was too perceptive, too good at reading me. So I became careful, too careful, and that, I think, is what made him start to wonder. One night as I was cleaning up after dinner, Tom leaned against the counter, watching me. You've been quiet lately, he said. I kept my hands busy, scrubbing harder than necessary. Just tired. He didn't respond right away. When I finally looked up, his eyes were sharp. Assessing, is something wrong? He asked. The words sent a rush of panic through me. I forced a smile. Of course not. But I could tell he wasn't convinced. Avoiding Edward at home didn't stop the fire between us. It only made it worse. The distance, the secrecy, the knowledge that we couldn't have each other, only made us want it more. At the gym, our restraint cracked. One evening, after a long session, we found ourselves alone in the back room, breathing hard, sweat glistening on our skin. He reached for me first, pulling me against him. I didn't resist, I didn't want to. His lips found mine, and this time there was no hesitation. No doubt it was fire. It was reckless, and it was everything I shouldn't have wanted. His hands gripped my waist, my fingers tangled in his hair, and for a moment I forgot everything. Tom, the rules, the reality of what we were doing. All I knew was that I didn't want to stop, and Edward, he wasn't letting go. Not now, not ever. I told myself we could control it, that we wouldn't go further, that we could stop whenever we wanted. But deep down I knew the truth. We were already lost in this, and soon someone was going to get burned. I thought we were careful. I thought we were smart. I thought we could control it. But I underestimated Tom. He wasn't a fool. He didn't know the truth yet, but he could feel it, the change in me, the distance, the hesitations. So he started testing me deliberately, subtly, and then in bed everything became clear. Tom touched me that night like he was searching for something, something he had lost. His hands moved over my skin, but I felt nothing, not warmth, not desire, not even guilt, just emptiness. He pressed his lips to my neck, waiting for a response. I gave him nothing, and that was when I felt him stop. He pulled back just enough to look at me, his breath slow, heavy. Diana. His voice was quiet but laced with something dangerous. What's wrong? I swallowed hard. Nothing. He studied me, his eyes scanning every inch of my face as if searching for the woman he thought he knew. Then he said the words that made my heart stop. Who is he? My stomach twisted. I had prepared for this moment in my head, had told myself I would have an excuse, a lie, and escape. But when the moment came, I said nothing. Tom exhaled, sharply rolling onto his back. He didn't ask again. He didn't need to, because the silence had already answered for me. After that night, the air between us changed. It was no longer just distance. It was war. The argument started small at dinner. About nothing, about everything. I would set the table wrong and he would snap at me. He would forget something at work and I would roll my eyes. We were unraveling, and Tom. Why, one night he slammed a glass onto the counter, his frustration boiling over. "Just tell me the truth." "Diana," he demanded. I crossed my arms. "What truth?" His jaw clenched. "That you don't love me anymore." The words hit harder than I expected, not because they were wrong, but because they were right. It was Edward who finally said it out loud. "We need to stop." I stared at him, my heart hammering. We were in the gym like always, the place where this all began. His voice was steady, but I could see the tension in his jaw, the guilt in his eyes. "It's too much." He continued. "I can't do this to Tom." I felt my stomach drop. "You're leaving me." He sighed, raking a hand through his hair. "Diana, this isn't right." The words sliced through me, not because I didn't already know that, but because for the first time I realized I wasn't ready to let him go. I shook my head. "No." Edward's brows furrowed. "No, you can't end this." My voice was shaking, but I didn't care. "I love you." His breath caught for a moment. He looked like he wanted to deny it, to fight it, but he didn't, because he knew he felt it too. So he took a step back. "Diana, we can't." I reached for his hand, gripping it tightly. "You think I can just go back to my life, to my marriage, to pretending?" My voice cracked. "I need you, Edward." His expression twisted, torn between wanting me and knowing we were past the point of return. I could see the war inside him, the guilt, the fear. But most of all, the wanting. And that was when I said the words that sealed everything. "I can't stand the thought of you with someone else." His lips parted slightly, his breathing uneven. "I don't want to see you with another girl," I whispered. "I don't want to watch you move on." "Edward, I can't." His hands clenched into fists, his whole body tense. "Diana, you're married." "I don't love him." The words were out before I could stop them, and just like that, the last slide between us was gone. We stood there, neither of us moving, neither of us willing to be the first to walk away. I reached up, tracing my fingers along his jaw. "Edward," I whispered, and then his lips were on mine. This time there was no hesitation, no holding back, just fire. "'Tis neat, just us." And in that moment we both knew there was no turning back. This wasn't just a mistake anymore. This was real, and we were old, and my story ends here. If you feel that this story is meaningful and brings useful lessons, please like and subscribe to the channel to support me. Thanks for listening, and see you in the next videos.